I still hear the sound of his van pulling up outside that morning, the low hum, the crunch of tires on gravel, the quick knock that came right after. It was supposed to be a routine delivery, but that moment, that sound, ended up marking the day my life quietly tilted off its axis. Hi everyone, thank you for clicking on my story today. If you've ever felt torn between what you should feel and what you actually feel, you'll understand me by the end of this. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. Anyway, this is my truth. It started in the kind of quiet that fills a house when love has faded, but life insists on going on. My husband, Eric, and I had been married 9 years. We weren't fighting, not really, just existing in this sort of dull, polite distance that felt worse than anger. We still shared a home, meals, even the occasional laugh. But there was no spark left in the middle of it. We'd moved to a small town after Eric's promotion, one of those picture-perfect suburbs where everyone waves but no one really knows you. I worked from home as a freelance designer, spending most of my days in front of a glowing screen while Eric disappeared for 10-hour stretches into an office full of people who seemed to drain whatever warmth he had left when we first got married. By the time he came home, he was tired, distracted. We'd eat dinner in silence, watching TV like roommates. Some nights, he'd fall asleep on the couch, still holding his phone, unread notifications lighting up his face. I told myself it was fine, that maybe this was just what long marriages looked like, that passion wasn't supposed to survive the years. But there was this ache, not even for romance, but for something simple, for someone to look at me and see me again. The first time I met him, Jason, it wasn't even memorable. Just another morning delivery. I was working on a client presentation when the doorbell rang. I remember glancing at the clock, 10:12 a.m., and sighing because I hadn't even showered yet. I opened the door expecting the usual quick exchange, but the man standing there wasn't the one who usually came. He was younger than most of the delivery guys, maybe mid-30s, fit in that natural, effortless way that comes from being on your feet all day. He wore the company's gray polo shirt, sleeves pushed up his forearms, his name stitched in small white thread, Jason. He smiled, not the polite, detached kind, but one that reached his eyes. "Morning. Got a delivery for, Mrs. Bennett?" "Yeah, that's me," I said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind my ear, suddenly self-conscious about my messy bun and the coffee stain on my shirt. "Big box today," he said, balancing it on one hip like it weighed nothing. "Want me to bring it inside?" Normally, I'd have said no, but something about the way he asked, not pushy, just kind, made me step aside and say, "Sure, thank you." He carried it in effortlessly and set it down near the dining table. As he straightened up, his arm brushed mine just lightly, but it was enough to send a pulse of awareness through me I hadn't felt in years. He didn't seem to notice, or maybe he did, and was too polite to show it. He just smiled again and said, "You have a nice place. Feels peaceful." I laughed, more to hide my sudden nervousness than anything. Peaceful's one word for it. He nodded like he understood something I hadn't said. "All right then, enjoy your day, Mrs. Bennett." And just like that, he was gone. But the strange thing was, after he left, I couldn't focus on my work. I kept hearing his voice, soft and casual, replaying that word, peaceful. The house didn't feel peaceful at all. It felt empty. A few days later, he came again. Another package, another small knock. I remember checking the mirror before opening the door this time, actually brushing my hair, fixing my shirt. It wasn't that I was trying to impress him, I told myself. I just didn't want to look half asleep again. He smiled when I opened the door. "Hey, Mrs. Bennett, got another one for you." "You can call me Sarah," I said before I could stop myself. "Sarah," he repeated, like he was testing how it felt to say it. "All right then, Sarah it is." There was an ease to the way he said it, not flirtatious exactly, just comfortable, like we were old friends. I offered him a glass of water, partly out of politeness, partly because I didn't want him to leave so quickly. We stood in the kitchen, sunlight pouring through the blinds, talking about small things, the weather, traffic, the never-ending stream of deliveries he had that week. It was so simple, so normal. But when he laughed, something in his tone felt genuine in a way I hadn't heard in a long time. Then his phone buzzed and he glanced down. "Gotta run. But hey, you have a good rest of your day, Sarah." I watched him walk out to the van, the sunlight catching his shoulders, and for a second I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Then the guilt came, quick and sharp, like stepping on something you didn't see. It was nothing. Just a conversation. Just kindness. That's what I told myself. Still, that night when Eric came home and asked if there was any mail, my stomach fluttered. Not from fear, but from the secret I was suddenly keeping. A week later, it rained. One of those relentless summer storms that makes everything feel gray and soft. I was curled up on the couch with my laptop when I heard the knock again, faint, almost drowned out by the rain. When I opened the door, Jason stood there soaked through, holding a small package under his jacket. His hair was wet, sticking to his forehead. "Hey," he said with a grin. "Sorry, I tried to keep it dry." "You look like you need a towel more than the box does," I said, stepping back. "Come in before you catch a cold." He hesitated just a heartbeat, then stepped inside, water dripping from his sleeves onto the floor. I handed him a towel, and he laughed as he wiped his face. "I'm making tea," I said before I could stop myself. "Do you want some?" He looked surprised, then smiled. Yeah, that'd be great." We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the rain thrumming softly against the windows. There was something strangely intimate about the quiet, the sound of the storm, the faint scent of his damp clothes, the way his eyes held mine when he talked. He told me about his job, about how he liked the solitude of it, no boss breathing down his neck, no office politics. I told him about my design work, about how sometimes the silence in this house was the hardest part of my day. He listened, really listened. At one point, I laughed at something he said, and he leaned in a little closer. I noticed the faint scar on his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. And in that small space between us, something shifted. It wasn't spoken. It wasn't even acknowledged. But it was there, humming quietly under the surface, dangerous and real. The rain kept falling. Neither of us moved for a long moment. Then, as if realizing how close we'd gotten, he cleared his throat and stood up. "I should go. Long route today." "Of course," I said, my voice softer than I intended. He paused at the door, looked back once, and said, "You know, it's nice, talking to someone who actually listens." And then he was gone again. The house felt heavier after he left. Warmer, but lonelier too. That night, Eric came home late again. I asked him about his day, and he barely looked up from his phone. "Same as always," he said. I went to bed before him, lying awake, long after the lights were off. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jason's smile, the rain in his hair, the way his voice softened when he said my name. I told myself it was harmless, just human connection. But deep down, I already knew that something had begun, something small and dangerous that I couldn't undo. And it all started with a delivery I never should have signed for. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I drifted off, I found myself replaying little fragments, the way his eyes softened when I laughed, the warmth in his voice when he said my name, the sound of rain against the window while he sat across from me. It was innocent, I told myself. Completely innocent. But my heart didn't believe me. The next morning, I made coffee for 2 out of habit, only realizing my mistake when I poured the second cup and stared at it, cooling on the counter. I threw it out quickly, embarrassed by something no one could see. Days passed. He didn't come again that week, and I hated that I noticed. Every time a delivery van passed down the street, I found myself glancing out the window, pretending I was just curious, not waiting. Then, on Friday afternoon, the doorbell rang. I didn't even look through the peephole. I knew the sound of his knock by then, light, polite, but with a rhythm I recognized instantly. My heart tripped in my chest. When I opened the door, Jason stood there, in the same gray polo, smiling like nothing had changed. The sunlight hit him from behind, outlining him in that golden afternoon glow that made everything feel softer. "Hey," he said casually, holding up the box. "Got another one for you." "Of course you do," I said, trying to sound composed. "You're keeping my online shopping habit alive." He laughed, and for a moment, everything felt too easy, too natural. I stepped aside for him to bring the box in, and as he did, his arm brushed mine again, just like that first day. Only this time, he paused, his eyes flicking toward mine. It wasn't a look you could mistake. It wasn't long enough to be obvious, but it lingered just a few seconds too many. My pulse quickened. I turned away, pretending to adjust something on the counter, and said, "You're working late again today?" He nodded, setting the box down. "Fridays are always heavy, but honestly?" He hesitated, then smiled. "This stop's kind of my favorite." I froze. It was such a small sentence tossed into the air like it didn't mean anything, but the weight of it hung between us. He must have seen my reaction because he quickly added, "You're easy to talk to, that's all." But we both knew that wasn't all. He handed me the scanner, and when our fingers touched, I felt it again, that same quiet current, the one that had no business existing between two people who barely knew each other. I signed quickly, trying to steady my breath. "There, all set." "Right," he said softly, his voice low. "Well, I'll see you around, Sarah." He left, but this time, I didn't watch him go. I couldn't. I stood there with the door still open, cool air drifting in, and wondered what exactly I was letting myself step into. That night, Eric mentioned he'd be working through the weekend. "We're behind on a client rollout," he said over dinner. "Might need to stay overnight Saturday." "Overnight?" I asked, my tone too sharp. He looked up briefly. "Yeah, just one night. Don't wait up." I nodded, stabbing at my food, trying to sound casual. "Sure, no problem." Inside, I felt that hollow ache again, the one that had been growing quietly for months. Later, when he fell asleep on the couch, I stood by the window, staring at the empty street. The glow of the lamppost outside flickered, and I caught my own reflection in the glass, a woman who looked both restless and lonely, framed by the stillness of her own life. Saturday came with gray skies and silence. I tried to fill the hours laundry, work, meaningless scrolling, but the quiet pressed in harder than usual. Around noon, I ordered groceries online, just to have something to expect, something to break the monotony. When the confirmation email came through, I saw the delivery time, 4:30 p.m., and the name at the bottom of the note, Driver Jason W. I stared at it for a long time. My heart raced, but I didn't change it. I told myself I was being ridiculous, it was just a coincidence, just another delivery. But when 4:30 came, I was standing by the window again, pretending I wasn't waiting. The van pulled up, right on time. He stepped out, clipboard in hand, same easy smile, same calm confidence that made the air feel too thick around him. "Twice in 1 week," he said when I opened the door. "You'll start thinking I'm stalking your address." I laughed nervously. Well, maybe I just order too much. He carried the bags inside without asking this time, setting them gently on the counter. For a moment, we stood there in the small kitchen, the late afternoon light stretching long across the floor. There was no reason to stay, no reason to talk. But neither of us moved. He broke the silence first. "So, Eric working again today?" The way he said my husband's name casually, but with awareness, sent a ripple through me. "Yeah," I said softly. "He's staying overnight at work." Jason nodded slowly. "That must get lonely." "It's fine," I lied. He gave me a look, one that said he didn't believe me. "You don't have to pretend. I get it. My ex used to work nights all the time. Silence gets loud after a while, doesn't it?" I met his eyes. "Yeah, it does." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The hum of the refrigerator filled the space between us, and I became painfully aware of how close he was, how small the distance had become without either of us meaning to close it. He looked down, then back at me, like he was fighting something inside himself. "I should go," he said quietly. "Of course," I said, even though every part of me wanted him to stay. He turned toward the door, paused, and then looked back over his shoulder. "You're really easy to talk to, Sarah." The words were the same as before, but this time the meaning was unmistakable. And then he left again, and I was alone with the echo of something dangerous that had just been born. That night, the storm came back. Not as strong as the last one, but enough to fill the house with sound, soft thunder, steady rain, that hollow rhythm that makes everything feel heavier. I tried to sleep, but couldn't. At one point, I went to the kitchen to make tea. When I walked past the counter, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I hesitated before opening it. "Didn't mean to make things awkward today. Just wanted to say I hope you're okay. Jason." My stomach flipped. I stared at the message for a full minute, trying to decide whether to reply. I shouldn't. I knew I shouldn't. But my fingers moved anyway. "You didn't make things awkward. It's fine. Thanks for checking." A few seconds later, the dots appeared. "Good. I just didn't want you to think I crossed a line." "You didn't," I wrote, my hands trembling slightly. "It was just a nice conversation." Then came his reply. "It's been a long time since I had one of those." I exhaled slowly, staring at the screen. The rain was softer now, but every drop outside felt like a countdown to something I wasn't sure I could stop. Before I could think better of it, I typed, "Same here." He didn't respond right away, but the next morning, when I stepped onto the porch to grab the paper, I found something small sitting beside it, a single coffee cup from the cafe downtown. Still warm, my name written on the lid in careful, slanted handwriting. My breath caught. It was ridiculous. A gesture so small it shouldn't have meant anything. But in that moment, standing barefoot on the porch with the quiet morning air around me, it felt like everything. Inside the cup holder, tucked under the lid, was a folded note. Just one line, written in blue ink. "Maybe the silence doesn't have to be so loud." My hands shook as I read it. The air felt thick and electric, like the world was holding its breath. That's when I realized this wasn't something I could laugh off anymore. Something had shifted for good, and there was no pretending otherwise. I didn't see him for 3 days after the note. 3 days that felt like weeks long, restless hours filled with second-guessing and guilt I couldn't quite name. Every time I passed the kitchen counter where that coffee cup had sat, I felt a pull in my chest. I should have thrown the note away. I told myself that a dozen times. But instead, I folded it neatly and tucked it into a drawer, as if keeping it hidden could make it less wrong. On the 4th morning, I heard the sound of a van door shutting outside. My heart knew before my mind did. I peeked through the window and saw him there, Jason, standing in the driveway, phone in hand, glancing toward the house. There was no scheduled delivery that day. He wasn't supposed to be there. For a long second, I considered not answering the door. Pretend I wasn't home. Pretend this wasn't happening. But when he finally looked up and our eyes met through the glass, it was already too late. I opened the door slowly, my voice barely steady. "You're off your route today." He gave a faint, nervous smile. "Yeah, I was in the area. I had some time." We both knew what that meant, and what it didn't. I stepped aside, even though he hadn't asked to come in. He hesitated on the threshold before crossing it, like he knew that once he did, something would change. The air inside felt heavy, thick with everything we weren't saying. "You didn't have to come by," I said, my voice low. "I know," he said, "but I wanted to." He set his phone on the counter, close to mine. That small, quiet act, his things beside mine, made something inside me tighten. "I couldn't stop thinking about you," he admitted. The words were simple, but the way he said them made the room feel smaller. "I know I shouldn't say that." I turned away, gripping the edge of the counter. "Jason." He stepped closer, not enough to touch, but close enough that I could feel the warmth from him, smell the faint trace of rain on his jacket. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured. His voice broke a little. "I just needed to see you." I closed my eyes. "This is crazy. You barely know me." "I know enough to see that you're not happy," he said quietly. That hit harder than I expected. My throat tightened. "You don't know what goes on in my marriage," I said, but even I heard the weakness in my words. "No," he said, "but I know what it looks like when someone feels unseen." Something inside me cracked then, not because of what he said, but because of how true it felt. When I turned around, he was closer. Not touching me, just standing there with that look, the kind of look you can't unsee once it's given. The silence stretched. The air pulsed with something fragile and inevitable. "Jason," I whispered, though I didn't know if I meant it as a warning or a plea. His hand lifted slightly, stopping midair as if asking permission. I didn't move. The first touch was barely anything, fingers brushing my arm, light as breath, but it felt like a confession. He hesitated, his voice rough when he spoke. "Tell me to stop." I couldn't. The next moment was quiet, almost reverent, the kind of silence that feels sacred and dangerous at once. When his hand found mine, I didn't pull away. I should have. Every logical part of me screamed to. But logic had nothing to do with what was happening. There was no rush, no urgency, just a slow, quiet surrender, a realization that the boundary I'd been holding onto so tightly had already dissolved somewhere along the way. He leaned in, close enough that I could feel his breath against my skin. "I don't want to make this harder for you," he said. But he already had. The world narrowed to the space between us, a fragile, trembling heartbeat away from a choice that couldn't be undone. When he finally kissed me, it wasn't wild or impulsive. It was slow, careful, like he was afraid the moment itself might break. And maybe it did. Because everything after that blurred: the sound of rain beginning outside, the warmth of his hands, the ache of being seen after so long. Then, mercifully, the world faded to black. When I opened my eyes, the light had changed. The rain had stopped. The clock on the wall read 5:47 p.m. Jason was sitting at the edge of the couch, lacing his boots. The room smelled faintly of coffee and something softer, something that would linger long after he left. Neither of us spoke at first. There was too much, and not enough, to say. Finally, he broke the silence. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." "Me neither," I whispered. He turned to look at me, eyes searching mine. "But I don't regret it." I swallowed hard. "You should." He nodded slowly. "Maybe, but I won't." I looked down at my hands, clasped tightly in my lap. My wedding ring caught the dim light, and for a moment, I felt like I was looking at someone else's life. Someone I'd been pretending to be. Jason stood. "I should go before it gets dark." I nodded. "Yeah." He hesitated by the door, glancing back one last time. "I'm sorry, Sarah." "Don't be," I said softly, though my voice trembled. "Just don't come by again." He gave a faint, broken smile. "If that's what you want." "It's what I have to want," I said. He nodded, then left without another word. The door closed, and with it, something inside me seemed to collapse. I sat there for a long time, listening to the quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't bring peace, only weight. When I finally stood, I saw the faint outline of his coffee cup on the table, the ring of condensation marking where it had been. I wiped it away, but the mark didn't fade. That night, Eric called. "We're wrapping up early. I'll be home by midnight," he said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Okay, drive safe." After hanging up, I stood by the sink, staring out at the dark yard, the faint reflection of myself in the glass, the same woman, but different now in some irreversible way. My phone buzzed once more. A text. "Jason, I'll stay away. But if you ever need to talk, you know where I am." He didn't reply. Instead, I deleted the message, then turned off the phone, setting it face down on the counter. But even with the screen black, I could still see the words burned behind my eyelids. I walked through the house, turning off the lights one by one. Each room looked smaller now, quieter, as if holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do next. When I reached the bedroom, I paused at the doorway. The sheets were still neat, untouched, the faint scent of Eric's cologne still lingering in the air. I sat down on the edge of the bed and finally let myself cry, not because of what happened, but because of how it had made me feel. Alive, seen, guilty, terrified all at once. I thought about Jason's words. Maybe the silence doesn't have to be so loud. But now, it was deafening. And somewhere in the distance, I heard a delivery van drive past, its engine fading into the night. I didn't know if it was his. I didn't look. Because whatever I might have seen, whatever part of me might have wanted to run after it, I couldn't take that step again. Not now. Not after crossing the line I could never uncross. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes his hand brushing mine, the rain against the window, the look in his eyes right before he left. And every time, I'd jolt awake, the weight of what I'd done crashing over me again like a wave I couldn't escape. When Eric came home, it was almost 1 a.m. He kissed my forehead, whispered a tired, "You're still up?" and went straight to the shower. I just nodded, pretending to scroll through my phone while my heart beat too fast. The smell of his shampoo drifted from the bathroom, the same one I used to love. Now, it made my stomach twist. He came to bed a few minutes later, his arm finding its way around my waist. His breath was warm against my neck as he whispered, "Missed you." And I wanted to cry not out of guilt alone, but because I didn't know who you was anymore. The woman he missed? She didn't exist. The next morning, I went through the motions. Coffee, dishes, work emails, a smile at the neighbor. On the surface, everything looked the same. But inside, I felt hollowed out like someone had taken a chisel to my chest and carved something out that I couldn't name. I told myself it was just a mistake, a moment that would fade if I buried it deep enough. But then the smallest things would pull me back. A knock at the door from a different driver and my pulse would spike. The sound of a van on the street and my breath would catch. A quiet afternoon, and I'd think about how the silence used to feel different. By the third day, I found myself rearranging the kitchen drawers, the one where I'd hidden his note. I told myself I was just cleaning, but really, I wanted to see it, to touch the proof that I hadn't imagined what happened. I held the folded paper between my fingers, my heart thudding like I'd been caught doing something wrong all over again. Then I heard Eric's voice from the hallway. "Hey, what's that?" I froze. "Just a recipe," I said quickly, shoving it into my pocket. He stepped into the kitchen, still in his work clothes. "You okay? You've been quiet lately." "Just tired," I said. It was the easiest lie to tell. He came closer, brushing his thumb across my cheek. "You know you can talk to me, right?" That should have been the moment. The one where I told him everything, confessed, cried, begged for forgiveness. But instead, I smiled. "Of course." And just like that, the lie settled deeper between us. A week passed. Jason didn't text again, didn't show up on my route. It should have been a relief, but it wasn't. I started checking the window without meaning to, watching for a van that never came. At night, when Eric drifted off beside me, I'd replay everything, trying to pinpoint the exact second I'd lost control. It wasn't the kiss, I realized. It was before that. Maybe when he'd noticed the sadness in my voice, or when I'd started waiting by the window like a fool for someone who was never supposed to matter. Guilt is a strange thing. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It seeps into everything, your thoughts, your smile, your sleep, and it makes the ordinary unbearable. One afternoon, about 2 weeks later, I saw him again. I was coming out of the grocery store when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Sarah." I turned, and there he was standing by his van, sunglasses in hand, looking both relieved and hesitant. My first instinct was to walk away, pretend I didn't hear him, but my feet stayed rooted to the pavement. "I didn't think I'd see you again," he said quietly. "You shouldn't have," I replied. He nodded. "I know." There was a long pause. The air between us felt charged again, but this time it wasn't desire. It was sadness. Regret, something softer and heavier. "I've thought about that day a lot," he said. "And about you." He swallowed hard. "Don't." He smiled faintly. You always tell people what not to do, huh? Because it's easier than admitting what I want to, I said before I could stop myself. His eyes softened. And what do you want to admit? I looked away, the sunlight catching on my wedding ring. That it wasn't supposed to mean anything, but it did. Jason stepped closer, his voice low. Then it meant something to both of us. For a moment, the world fell away, the traffic, the people, the noise. Just his eyes on mine and the weight of everything we couldn't take back. Then he said, I'm leaving the route next week, got a transfer. The words hit harder than I expected. So this is goodbye. He nodded. It has to be. I wanted to say something to thank him, to apologize, to ask him not to go, but instead, I just said, take care of yourself. He smiled sadly. You too, Sarah. And then he was gone. That night, I sat outside on the porch, watching the sunset bleed into the sky. The world kept turning, like nothing had changed. But I had. Eric came out and sat beside me, handing me a cup of tea. You've been distant lately, he said gently. Are we okay? I stared into the steam rising from the cup, searching for the right words. I don't know, I whispered. He looked at me, concern in his eyes. What does that mean? It means, I think I forgot what being okay feels like, I said softly. He reached for my hand, and after a moment, I let him take it. His grip was warm, steady, familiar, but it didn't feel the same as before. We sat in silence, watching the sky fade to dark, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I had to fill the quiet. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, life began to smooth over again the way water does after a stone is thrown in. But even when the ripples fade, the memory of the splash lingers. Sometimes, I still think about that day, about Jason, about how a single moment can rewrite everything you think you know about yourself. I haven't seen him since that afternoon. But every so often, when I hear the sound of a van door shutting somewhere in the distance, I catch myself turning my head before I remember not to. There's a part of me that still aches not for what we did, but for what it revealed. The emptiness I'd ignored, the version of myself I'd lost. I don't know if I'll ever tell Eric. Maybe I will, someday. Or maybe I'll carry it quietly, like a scar that doesn't show but never really fades. What I do know is that love and guilt are both forms of gravity. They pull you in, keep you grounded, but sometimes they also make it hard to breathe. If you've been listening this far, thank you. Tell me if you were in my place. Would you have told the truth? Or would you have buried it and moved on, pretending nothing happened? I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Because sometimes, the things we don't say, they're the ones that haunt us most.